Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Threat Talk. I'm your host, Bob Hansmann, and today's episode is about sharing responsibility between IT and end users in regard to endpoint security. Now, I started in security when it was just endpoint antivirus and some firewalls, but endpoint security has evolved into a much more capable and much more complex issue. So to help us simplify this, we've invited Infoblox CIO Brad Bell and CISO Ed Hunter. Gentlemen, thank you for joining.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for the invite.
Hi there. Thanks for having us.
Now, we're in October, which is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Now, this is typically focused on end user awareness, and it started as a consumer thing, but it's now also, applicable on, the awareness training necessary to help users on an agency or corporate network. About what's the capacity of users today for learning? Because when I got into this, a lot of the users, they were still trying to figure out how to set the time on their VCRs, which some of our ancient, video recording systems for young listeners, you can look it up and Google it. But today's average user, they've got smartphones and other devices, and a lot of them take pride in, knowing every capability of their device. So where are users today? How capable are they of being an actual security value?
Well, great question, Bob. I think, first of all, are they capable of learning? You betcha. I think where it gets a little more tricky is, do users understand the potential impact of what the security breach might look like or impact them in a way that's negative? I don't think they understand the risk or the impact. And so while they can learn, they may not be able to determine what action to take as a result of those two vectors. I think it's really imperative, as we do in most corporate environments, to create a continued learning environment where people have an opportunity to understand what these vectors look like and what the remediation efforts look like. And in our company and many, we do things like phishing programs, and we can continually look at the data and the return information on those phishing programs to understand if there's uptake on managing that risk and exposure company-wide. And then we can change our training around that, increase the frequency or depth of that training, put more rigor in place or more controls in place. So, short answer is yes, people are engaged and want to learn, I think, at least in the corporate environment. In the commercial or social environment, it's a little bit different. I do think there's a bit of a bifurcation in understanding what happens when you click a button or what happens when you answer a quiz on any social platform and those kinds of things, and what the risk and impact is.
Okay. Ed, any thoughts on your experience?
Yeah, certainly. Email is just one potential vector. You see that as a primary vector to get an initial foothold. So it's up to the user to really be the first line of defense and just really take a look at all those offers that come in your email. Now IAM is starting to become a very active way of trying to solicit a response as well. So it's really up to the user to be that first line. We can implement all these technical measures on the back end, and they could be 99% or 99.9% effective, but there's always the first line, right? Email still comes in from the internet, and it's up to the user to look at that email and kind of evaluate whether or not that's the right thing, what the right thing to do is.
I wanted to follow up on that. So now we talk about how capable they are. How willing? What's their attitude? And this comes from some historical perspective of my own. About 20 years ago, I was at a company where we did a survey, and it wasn't a survey of our enterprise customers. It was a survey of their users. And so we asked them, one of the questions was about, if your endpoint, if your laptop, company issued laptop, was to become infected, how responsible do you feel? And it was really an interesting one because it went everywhere from, a fairly high number of users in Asia would have felt like they had somehow failed their company if their machine became, infected. It went down to kind of a little more of a mediocre response. Some people were worried, some people weren't. In Europe and Middle East, you got to North America and it was like, well, it shouldn't have gotten to my machine in the first place. That IT, they should have protected me. They had no sense of responsibility at all. Now, again, that's 20 years ago. How are you feeling the attitude of people? It seems a lot different to me, but I wanted to hear from you.
I think it's changing. I also think, and you point this out, there's a geographic element to this, cultural, but there's also this age differential. I think the folks that are probably a little more older, like myself, are listening and trying to comply and pay attention and understand what's going on. Although that's a mixed bag too, depending on your industry. Um, but the kids, these social platforms and engagement platforms are part of their lifestyle, and so I do think there is a different attitude, if you will, around what that means. And sometimes I think that comes with how can it possibly hurt me, and maybe not some insight into the potential ramifications or risk for these things I mentioned before, like the social engineering that goes on some of the platforms around, hey, take this quiz. You're really unlocking information that can help unlock elements of your future passwords, for example.
Ed, what's the kind of the attitude on the programs you're putting in place as the CISO? I mean, are they more acceptable of that? Are they a lot of pushback?
That's really an evolving question and answer. I've seen it really change over time. Back in the old days, right, we really had two separate devices, right? Said, hey, this is your work machine. You only do work there. And if you need to go look at your email or do something different, then you really need to do that on your personal device, right? Whereas now we have kind of a fair use policy, most companies do, where it's okay to do a little bit of limited surfing or something. A lot of people, salespeople in this company, right? They're traveling. They don't want to bring two laptops. They don't want to have two phones. So there's kind of an intermix of requirements and what people want to do, need to do when they're traveling and so forth. So there's a bit of give and take between IT and the user population, but it's a conversation, right? So as long as it doesn't introduce a lot of risk to the company, we're okay with that. And we do, when we give you a machine, we do our very best to make sure it's patched, that it has security controls on it, that we're monitoring it for malware, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't do that, obviously, on your home machine. So we try to advise our users to really do your work on your work machine and do your personal stuff on your personal machine. But there's always this kind of fuzzy line. And with phones, it's also really changed, right? Back when the first PDAs came out 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't internet capable. It was just a device, like a palm device that you had in your hand that you put your schedule in and so forth. But as capabilities have been added, it's another computer. It's more capable than that computer that the company issued to you 15 years ago. It's got more CPU, it's got more memory, it's always connected. What that translates into is that you always need to be aware, and that you always need to be constantly evaluating. And in most companies, people are looking at their email on their personal phone, because companies don't want to issue company phones anymore because it's such a personal device, right?
Yep.
Because someone wants the new iPhone came out yesterday. I mean, are they going to call IT and get a new one? Some people prefer the Note, or the phone that opens up and has a fold in the middle and it's double the size. I mean, IT isn't going to keep on top of all those trends and so forth. So there's a bit of give and take there, and you just need to make sure that if you have any company data, even a scrap of it on a personal device, so you just need to be aware and treat it responsibly.
Yeah, the standard lifetime of your laptops is about 3 years, and that's the normal replacement cycle. That's ancient in cell phone years. I mean, you can't last it that long. So yeah, I can imagine just the management overhead on BYOD kind of devices would be a nightmare. And it has gotten easier, and on the end user side of thing, I can say it is easier to have just the one device and be able to do everything I need to on that one device. Because I used to carry two. Actually, I used to carry three because I had two phones and I had a pager. If anybody remembers those. So no, I think that the users, again, because they've also gotten so much technology, I think that's also helped elevate their capabilities. But now that we've talked a little bit about the user capabilities, and we've kind of inferred, and we don't really need to go into the detail too much on the technical capabilities to defend the endpoint. I'd like to talk about the threat side of things. So, what are the top of mind threats? We talked about phishing, number one, because you depend on your statistics, 90% of all attacks start with a phishing email, if not a phishing website. And I don't know if we want to talk about phishing email still, or maybe even talk about the phishing from the website, drive-by infections and things like that. What are your top of mind fears of a type of threat that you're worried that could get past your user?
Well, we talked a little bit about phishing, so that's really a primary vector, right? So moving beyond that, historically, in the early days, the attackers would send a malicious attachment and try to get the end user to click on that and infect their machine and establish a foothold and then move laterally. That's kind of a traditional attack method that we've seen over the years. More recently, attackers have tried to move beyond that by sending URLs. What the technology side has done is they've checked these URLs to make sure that they're good or bad. They go to a bad website and they will block them, right? And we've implemented technology to prevent that sort of an attack, but it goes back and forth, right? So the attackers recognize that we're doing this. So what they do is they'll send out a blank URL, and that URL will go nowhere or go to just a completely benign website. And then they'll load the malware later on, right? So where the malware lives, that's changed, right? But still, email is a primary vector. Just surfing around, you'll see all kinds of links out there, right? Be suspicious of those. On the forums and so forth, you see like a bit.ly link. Where do you think that goes, right? You don't even know. You click on that, it's just a link, right? So when those links come to you in email or you see them out there in the wild, just be suspicious of that. And we used to always advise people, people would call you up and say, hey, we want to validate this transaction on your credit card, right? And then they'd start asking you a bunch of personal information, and that's an attack. Your bank should never do that. I would hang up the phone and call the 800 number on the back of your credit card. And sometimes they'll leave you a voicemail with an 800 number, which isn't the 800 number on the back of the credit card. And I'll call them up and I'll lecture them on that, because that's just bad security practice, right? So it's about trust and looking at these links. I mean, again, on the technology side, we do a lot. We're continuously evaluating new technologies and rolling them out, right? So we have DNS security, checking to make sure that those websites aren't malicious and will prevent you from going there if they are. We have all kinds of technologies looking at the email and blocking known bad senders, or if there's malicious payloads or URLs and so forth. We can proxy these things. If we see that they go bad, we'll call you up. So that's the user side of things. There's also a lot that we do on the back end. And the other thing that I'd mention is that patching is incredibly important. And I know it's a pain, right? We just went through a thing with my my cell phone iOS provider, right? Where there was a security attack and there was a patch deployed, and IT sent out some advice to users to go patch, because we don't manage those devices. So users have to take the time to download the patch and apply it and reboot. It takes time out of their day, but it's important, because if you don't do that and also reboot, the patch doesn't take and you're vulnerable, right? And some of these 0 days attacks, you don't have, they could actually be actively exploited out there, and we only find out about it days or potentially weeks after the fact. So your window to react to these things is small and getting smaller, honestly, right?
Well, and I remember when a lot of the, when we first started getting cloud connected updates, because updates didn't, we started with email. That was the main reason people use the cloud. Then when we started doing other things on it, people started writing their apps, or vendors started writing their apps so they could get updates. And they used to allow you to just download the security update, not the new feature update. But that's where the frustration comes in, is if it's just a security update, those tend to be rather painless, short and sweet. But now you have these massive updates, and okay, I now feel more secure, and now my menu has changed on my favorite app, and I got to figure out how to use it again. And that's where the frustration comes in. It's not the security thing that frustrates people, it's all the other things that come out with those updates. So you mentioned iOS. It's like I had a whole bunch of security updates. I had them automatic, not a problem. And then when 15 came out, I got that update, and it's like, okay, it is more than security. I got a whole new interface I got to figure out.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people where certain features stopped working. So
I had a similar experience, but it's a good differentiation to keep in mind. Security update, typically we're just going to fix something, right? So iOS 14.8. And then when 15 came out, people installed that, and that was a feature update, and that broke a bunch of stuff, right? So historically,
and you had the subsequent patch after that, right?
Yeah, 1501, right? Yeah. But I mean, for us that have been in IT for a long time, you really want to kind of steer clear of that .00 release, that big feature update. Let somebody else go first, right? But not for the security stuff. Those are usually relatively small updates, quick download, quick reboot, and they protect you for just that one thing, right? And those typically don't, I mean, there have been exceptions, but those typically don't disrupt your device. It's those feature updates that you might want to delay for a little while.
Well, and then to underscore that, I was just going to say that you used to update it because there was a potential for things to be exploited. Every now and then there would a patch that said, oh, this is for a currently in the wild attack that's using this exploit, so you want to patch this. But most of them were preventative. But in the last year or so, it's like almost every patch I'm offered, whether it's for my browser or my phone or whatever, it's because there's something being used. There's an attack in the world right now, 0-day attack, using this vulnerability. You got to patch it because there's an actual threat, not just a potential threat. So the reason to patch has definitely gone up a few levels. Brad, you were going to say something there?
A couple things. Well, related to that, unfortunately, the world is being enabled by bad actors who have put software kits out there that let the average person go experiment as a hobby. So you're seeing an increased frequency that's backed by folks who know what they're doing, building these toolkits, and then being exploited by sort of hobbyists, we'll call it, unfortunately. So that's driving some of this. But I did want to comment. Ed had mentioned, because I've got a personal experience, quite a few of these, unfortunately, around texting. I get text from my bank saying there's some malicious activity in my account, click here. And I look at the URL. Of course, I didn't click. I call the bank immediately. And of course, they ask me to report it because it's not real. But I am getting a ton of these things, and I never respond to them. It used to be, the bank's never going to send you a voicemail or call you and things like that. But, texting, you don't really think that it's a potential vector, but I think it's growing, and I've definitely experienced it. I don't respond at all to those kinds of things.
Yeah, my tip for people when they talk to me about that is install the apps, because like I just got one of those 2 days ago, and it pretended to be from UPS. I was expecting a UPS package. I'd actually gotten a notice on my signature, even though I've had like 3 of these same things delivered. This one they insisted had to be signed for. And so they didn't leave it. So they left the note. So I was expecting something. And all of a sudden I get this text about, hey, something about to get this more quickly, check here. But I don't click on the links. I go to the app, because if they're going to send me a text, the app has the same information in it. And that's a trusted source. So yeah, no, I'm with you on that whole text, the SMS stuff. It's not just SIM swapping, people. It's links in any form.
Yeah, for sure. And unfortunately, the frequency is increasing. So pay attention.
Well, and on that note, we're going to jump ahead a little bit to about the middle of the agenda that we discussed when we were planning out this episode, and talk about that mix of consumer, because that was a personal purchase, but I was, of course, responding to it on my phone, which is something I use for corporate and personal use. And there were even, a request to go check this website out, because sometimes the websites, they don't show you what you want on your phone. You have to actually go to it in your browser to get it. And I've seen some malicious actors where they'll create fake websites that they aren't working properly on your phone, and it'll actually tell you, this is how this is number one clue, when it says, hey, and if this isn't displaying right, try it on your computer. I haven't had a legitimate company ever tell me that and admit their app may not be working properly. They always say, no, it works just fine. But we've got that bridge now where consumer threats can pose a risk to the corporate, or if you're in the government agency, the enterprise network can actually now be exposed to consumer risks. And that's going to be a big deal over the next few months as we get the holiday. Can you want to share anything on that, Ed, in particular? What's your worry as we get to the holiday season and all that consumer stuff's going to happen on your network?
Yeah, traditionally we send out an email right before the holiday season and remind people that there are all these scams, but it's not just a seasonal thing anymore, right? So the attackers will take advantage of whatever excuse they can come up with, right? So if it's the holiday season, they'll be sending you some incredible deal on a flat screen TV if you just click now, right? So the too good to be true deals, the links that go to some untrustworthy website. It's kind of more of the same, right? You just need to be aware. And around COVID, we've seen all kinds of, at the beginning of COVID especially, there were huge spikes. And here's some information that you didn't know about COVID, right? Click here, or you can get a free test kit. Click here, right? So they'll use whatever excuse, whatever the news du jour is, to try to lure you in, right? So yeah, there's always some heightened concern around the holiday season, but I say all year round.
Well, you bring up a good point, and it reminds me of the whole challenge around BYOD at work too. This confluence between consumer and corporate. We, as Ed mentioned, we control the asset piece, the PC or the Apple, and we put patches on it and we monitor that. But your cell phone, not so much, because people consider that sort of intrusive to do that on your personal device. Yet they have access, to your point, Bob. They have access to both corporate and social, and those things on that device get intermixed all the time. We can control it much easier on the corporate side with multi-factor auth and encryption and all sorts of things. But on the social side, there's that bridge that has to be, or can be, linked, and that becomes an interaction to be careful with. But one thing's really clear is that this edge is moving closer and closer to the end user. That end user must be secure. The device must be secure and locked down, and the access points from end to end need to be locked down. And so, you've got the interaction of the social side with the social networks and platforms and the gaming consoles and all those things going on, and that can be accessed on your cell phone. The same cell phone, again, that you're using for your corporate side. And so you can use these things to exploit. And again, it can be higher risk, which makes the BYOD policy components of the corporate versus the commercial side a balancing act, as Ed had mentioned there. And you can balance towards a more secure enterprise, but it's going to be at the expense of that flexibility if you're not going to issue a corporate phone, for example, for that endpoint. So there's always this balance that Ed talked about between the two that need to be managed carefully, depending on the environment and the type of work that folks are doing.
Yeah, I would say that the corporation's objectives in this area aren't any different than the end user's objectives, really. You don't want to be compromised and lose your banking information, and the company doesn't want to have our data exposed either, right? So there's a mutual benefit to making sure that at least kind of those baseline security things are taken care of across the board, whether that's on your personal PC or your phone, right? So if you leave your phone around and you don't have any pin on it at all, you leave it in an Uber and someone picks it up, they could possibly see your personal information as well as the company's information. So we both lose there, right? Yeah. And even simple things like on your home PC, if you have no password on it, if someone is able to compromise you, then that gives them kind of unlimited access. If you have like a local password on it, at least they have to go figure that out. That's an additional hurdle they have to jump through. So anything you can do, even if it's just minimal, maybe you don't patch every day, but you patch once a month. Microsoft releases patches on a monthly cadence, by the way, so you should be able to get away with it once a month. Just set it on automatic and forget it, right? But reboot your PC, because a lot of times these patches don't take unless you take the time to do that. Some people don't. Sleep is not the same as rebooting. Some people will sleep their machine for 6 months. And, again, here's another example of something that benefits you from just a day-to-day perspective. If you don't reboot your machine for 6 months, it's just going to get slower and slower and slower and slower. So rebooting it cleans out the memory and all that. So you get some performance benefit as well as being secure.
Yeah, and allows the security updates and patching to actually complete the process, which kind of leads us to the next thing. That's actually, as I was thinking about it, I've for years been tracking a lot of user education, user awareness training modules, and all the different things they talk about. And Ed, that's something I don't think I've seen anybody talk about, is that just good PC practices and how that will help your security better. If you just learn to, reboot at least once a week, something like that, shut it down for the weekend or something, those kinds of things would help. And that's something that I don't think I've ever seen training on. But you also mentioned that, like right before the holidays, you send out an email. Brad, you mentioned that, the phishing testing. So you guys have a variety of user education tools, user awareness tools. So I'm curious about what you've done to make it successful. So truth in lending to the listeners, I am also a Infoblox user. And one thing I've noticed in the company is that there doesn't seem to be any resentment around things like the phishing testing. And everywhere else I've been, a few companies that I've been at where they've sold those kinds of services, they OEM it, but because they're actually doing other true security products, but they also sell their OEM security awareness. There's always been user pushback. They think, oh, you're just trying, it's IT trying to pass the blame to us. So if there's a breach, we'll be able to blame the user because look at their tests. They failed the phishing exam 5 times in a row or something. How are you making that so positive of an experience?
Well, the first thing is it just has to be blameless, right?
Yeah.
It just has to be seen as a part of an educational program. And you have to have a multi-aspect approach to user education. So, it's fine to send people to an annual training. Everybody does that. It's usually part of the compliance program. On that, try to vary that, make it interesting. Don't send the same thing out every year. Maybe have a quiz to make sure people are paying attention. So that's kind of the best you can do there. But, we also have October, which we're just starting here, is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Send out some emails around that time. Send out some emails around Christmas, reminding them then. If some event happens like COVID, remind them that, to expect phishing emails around that. There are all kinds of opportunities, shall we say, to just put user awareness out there, have an intranet website with some how to spot a phish education and so forth. Take time on one-on-ones, send out emails from the CISO, from the CIO, from your CEO. You'll get a great response from your CEO because everybody is interested in what he thinks and what he has to say, right? Engage the executives, have them sponsor your program. Think about what more you can do. And it takes time. It takes time and effort, but invest that time and effort.
Cool. Now, the thing that occurred to me also is I noticed that when I've been in meetings, 2 things that have stood out to me. Number one, when I've been in meetings where we're talking about, hey, it's coming up on the end of the year, you're going to be setting your goals and stuff like that. They actually mentioned, that, there may be things you want to learn about security. It doesn't have to be directly related to your job. Just knowing more about security makes you a better employee. There's been encouragement for people to go and learn more. But also, every year, because I'm with a vendor, every year we have to take this test that says, do you understand how export law works? And I have to watch some videos and answer some questions. And then there's something else about sexual harassment training. And I watch some videos and I take some tests. And portions of your awareness training are just another one of those things. So it's not like it's a special thing. It's just part of all the different kinds of corporate training. You guys have done a great job of working this into just another process of being a good citizen of the company, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So Brad, was that intentional or?
Very much so. And Ed feels really strongly about this because he developed the program. So I think Ed mentioned, your job is really important, and so you have a responsibility towards your employees in the company, your coworkers, and just as a company in general. When you're driving a car, you wear a seatbelt. It's the same kind of thing, and so we have to engage our employee base through all these different modalities that Ed mentioned to get the word out, to make sure that everybody understands this is not something that's passive anymore. We all have to be active in our approach to helping reduce risk in the company around security.
Great. Now, we still had a great little topic that we'd hope to get to on Zero Trust, but we're running out of time. We'll hopefully be able to get the two of you, very, very grateful that you could give us the time you could today. Yeah, we've run out of time before we ran out of things to say. So Brad, Ed, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Ed, for joining. Appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. And I want to thank you, all of our listeners and viewers, for your time, because we'd like you to join us next time as we continue our efforts to help you stay on top of cybersecurity and ahead of cyber risks on Threat Talk.